Shrek Forever After is the fourth feature film in the Shrek franchise, and serves as a definitive conclusion to the series. It's also the one that I didn't watch until this year, and based on how little I see it discussed on the internet, I don't think I was alone in skipping the film when it was released back in 2010. For a movie that brought about the end of DreamWorks' then biggest franchise, Shrek Forever After feels oddly obscure, which is especially crazy to think about because it's not like Shrek ever really left the public consciousness. The Green Ogre is an enduring fixture of meme culture, and the other films in the franchise, most notably Shrek 2, have retained a cult following. Sure, the glut of official merchandise has slowed down since the Shrek glory days, but his image is everywhere, even in some very unwholesome places. We don't often talk about Shrek as an actual character these days, a flawed protagonist who went through 4 movies of development. He's become a jolly green joke, a popular reference to get, the second most bastardized green character to permanently become memeified. There doesn't seem to be any surefire way to reverse that pipeline, and far be it for me to stop people from having fun with Shrek memes. All I'd like to do with this video is shine a spotlight on the final film in the Shrek tetralogy, which also happens to be its strangest. Keep in mind, this is not some rave review. I don't think this film is perfect or even that great compared to the rest of DreamWorks' catalog. Megamind from the same year blows it out of the water. But if we can overlook clinical discussions of filmcraft and focus instead on the ideas at play in Shrek Forever After, we might come away with some new insights on the Shrek character and why his current meme status was predictable from the start. We can be normal about art for 5 minutes, right? Let's not pollute this decade-old kids movie with crap like, "Is it woke?" or "Did it subvert my expectations?" You people make me sick. Before we discuss the canonical endpoint of Shrek's continuity, it's important that we remember where the character's origin lies. Not the first Shrek movie, but rather the children's picture book it was adapted from. Shrek! By William Steig was published on October 17, 1990, a full decade before it served as the basis for the third highest grossing animation franchise in the world. Reading through the book's vibrant pages, it's hard to imagine that this humble, mixed-up fairy tale could transform into the marketing behemoth that it is today. When I was a lot younger, my parents took me to an exhibit at the Eric Carle Museum at Hampshire College, and it was there where I learned about this book and its author for the first time. It was surreal to find out that aside from the movies, there was an entirely different Shrek whose story played out in an entirely different way. There are the superficial similarities. Shrek is an ugly ogre questing in a medieval fantasy world. He is joined on his quest by a donkey, and at the end of the book he does marry a ugly princess, who may or may not herself be an ogre. The most striking difference between Shrek's book self and his movie counterpart might be his feats of legendary monstrosity. Book Shrek can literally breathe fire and eat lightning, and there appears to be no one aside from his bride who can match him for inflicting fear and terror on others. More so than a mere ogre, Book Shrek is a boogeyman, a horrifying inhuman monster whose rampage can only be stopped by his own whims, and he is so rarely in the mood to be nice. However, this version of the character is not without moments of vulnerability. Towards the end of the book, Shrek is surrounded by mirror reflections of his own grisly self, which at first he mistakes for a mob of creatures who would mean to do him harm. I think that this image is where the Shrek character we are familiar with begins to take shape. While Shrek loves to be who and what he is, the notion that what he is must be good doesn't follow. To the point that, if Shrek were to observe himself from a detached perspective, not entrenched within his own self-esteem, he would be afraid for all the same reasons everyone else fears him. It's a simple story that tells the children reading that maybe bad behavior is simply a fact of life, and we should at the very least understand how it feels to be subjected to our own worst qualities. By placing a sympathetic lens on a protagonist who embodies so many traits seen as negative by society, being ugly, having poor hygiene, hurting and stealing from others, associating with other similarly malign individuals, and worst of all, being content with all of the former, the ambiguous nature of good and evil is called into question. We congratulate Shrek for achieving his own form of happiness while also being aware of his monstrous nature. He is not condemned for being different, though he is undeniably so. And if Shrek can live an authentic life while treating nothing we hold dear as sacred, what does that say about those of us too fearful to take that same path for fear of social reprisal? All too often, we see people in real life base their principles around personal taboos. Whether it's depriving oneself of the opportunity for a certain type of consensual relationship, excluding members of other groups for fear that their values might be a corrupting influence, or even dismissing entire genres of entertainment for the sake of a perceived self-image. There are countless ways that people will write off their own freedom of choice if it means adhering to a moral code. It's a form of cognitive dissonance that keeps us from leading an examined life by assuring us that we should be grateful for our existing identity and place in society, no matter how limiting or incongruous with our real selves it might be. This is the status quo for our ogre antihero at the beginning of Shrek Forever After. He's a beloved figure in the community now, settled into a married life with kids, and each and every day he repeats the same domestic affectations. It's a starting point that takes place beyond the boundaries of most fairy tales, well within the happily ever after which we were promised. It's an uneasy space to begin a story in, and the film's overall darker tone reflects that. We are bearing witness to the slow entropic destruction of Shrek's own picture-perfect ending. Enter Butterpants, who is by far the standout new character of Shrek Forever After, not counting the villain Rumpelstiltskin. He's a young boy who, like all of us, thinks Shrek is pretty awesome. His father knows this too, and spends most of the birthday party of Shrek's triplets trying to convince the ogre to do his iconic roar. Or as Butterpants puts it,
"Do the roar!"
Butterpants has enjoyed a bit of meme fame over the years, and he might be the most remembered element of this film, again, outside of the main villain. His disconcerting monotone voice and repeated demands of Shrek to do the roar are comedy gold, allowing one of the most pivotal scenes of character work in the film to also be one of the funniest. In his own small way, Butterpants is essential to the narrative of Shrek Forever After. He represents that sense of childlike wonder that the franchise managed to retain even through its rockiest installment, Shrek the Third. The fact that he's noticeably fat and a little bit rude also helps characterize Butterpants as someone who might look up to Shrek, seeing in him a positive embodiment of some of his own traits. But therein lies a conflict. Shrek no longer believes that he possesses the essential qualities of the ogre he once was. Where Butterpants sees an aspirational figure, Shrek only sees a hollow shell where that figure once stood. He is once again inside of Steig's Hall of Mirrors, frightened not by the recognition of himself, but by lack of recognition. The mounting pressure of fulfilling his current obligations while reconciling the parts of his identity that he's lost builds inside of Shrek until it explodes into a roar to end all roars. It's a bold act of self-expression, let loose from the deepest pit of his soul, where he is still an archetypal monster, still feared and despised by all who glimpse his true nature. And to his dismay, everyone cheers. This prompts a second act of self-expression, more direct and performatively cruel, which does elicit the response he was looking for. Only this time, nobody expects that level of malice from him. Shrek is, maybe legitimately for the first time, taken to task for his bad behavior. In the earlier films, other characters have misjudged Shrek's intentions or manipulated him into thinking he needs to abandon his foundational characteristics, but never before has he been so wrong by the parameters of happiness that he himself has set. He argues with Fiona, saying that he wishes he could go back to before he rescued her, back when the world made sense. It's a dramatic beat straight out of Marriage Story, and the film treats it like the severe breach of their trust that it is. Fiona tries to remind Shrek of all the good fortune that has come his way since they've been together, but he doesn't have anything to say for himself. Rather than apologize and try to make it right, Shrek leaves his own children's first birthday party and storms off into the woods. It is there where he meets Rumpelstiltskin. At first blush, there isn't that much to Rumpelstiltskin as a villain. He's a shady contract broker who wants revenge on Shrek for some immensely petty reasons, and generally is a loathsome curly-toed weirdo. He fits well into the role of a classic evil trickster, and his lively mannerisms make every scene he appears in entertaining to watch. Even if he wasn't entertaining, his plan itself is so perfectly tailored for fostering all of Shrek's eternal conflict that his personality could have really been an afterthought. What truly sets him apart from previous villains in the franchise is that rather than being Shrek's polar opposite, he's actually got a lot in common with the ogre. The two hit it off in their first scene, drinking eyeball teenies together in the back of Rumpelstiltskin's carriage. Sure, Shrek was in need of someone he could bounce his problems off of, and Rumple is something of a slick manipulator, but it's not crazy to think that some of their common ground is real. Ditto for Rumpelstiltskin's admission of jealousy towards Shrek's once carefree ogre lifestyle. We do get the sense that this guy wants a happily ever after of his own, but doesn't want to give up any of his bad behavior to get it.
After all, it is the happily ever after that I deserve!
If Butterpants sees Shrek as a role model for the nonconformists, Rumple takes that idea to its logical extreme, flouting all societal strictures that would impede his personal gain. This is especially evident in his chosen business, offering Faustian bargains to poor unfortunate souls, which only wind up benefiting him. The contract he offers to Shrek is, on paper, exactly what the ogre wants: a day to return to his ogre roots and suffer no consequences for his bad behavior. All he has to do is give 1 day from his own life in exchange. Plied by Rumple's appeals to his self-esteem, he takes the deal, and, for a while, it is exactly what he wants. Villagers running scared, mobs hurling pitchforks at him, he even indulges in some thievery. In this one beautiful montage, movie Shrek is depicted more akin to book Shrek than he ever has been. It's a joyous celebration of his identity as an ogre, and we the audience get to indulge in some cathartic self-expression right along with him. So I accidentally cut a line out of the audio where I explained that the deal goes bad for Shrek because Rumpelstiltskin took the day he was born and it creates a parallel alternate timeline. Y'all know how it is with this be careful what you wish for stuff. You don't need me to explain it. There's definitely a lot that happens to Shrek in this parallel timeline, and most of it involves him trying to reunite with Fiona, who, without him to rescue her from the Dragon's Keep, managed to escape herself and now lives her own ogre life as the leader of a resistance. A resistance against the enslavement and exploitation of ogres that Rumpelstiltskin has reified in his new empire. Because when you're a curly-toed weirdo who is promised an ogre that the world will hate and fear his kind again, you might as well extract some profits from that situation yourself. And profit Rumple has. He's turned the castle into his own opulent nightclub, and he has an army of witches at his disposal. The city and countryside are of course a dystopian wreck because a bad king makes the land sour. What a stupid-ass trope. Fucking hell. Where was I? Oh yeah, Shrek and Rumpelstiltskin reunite in the alternate timeline, and this time Rumple is the one on top of the world and Shrek has nothing. It's here where I started to notice that while these characters are similar in that they are both aberrations in the eyes of conventional civil society, they're also blatantly foils to each other. Shrek can be a brutish entity of physical violence when he wants to be, and his unpleasant demeanor and unusual habits of personal care add to his perceived repulsiveness. Whereas Rumpelstiltskin is a sly charmer archetype who makes up in brains what he lacks in brawn. He's also obsessed with giving off the appearance you'd expect from a typical royal fop, occasionally donning silly wigs to suit his mood. The two were practically destined to be enemies, because the contrary qualities that set them apart from everyone else naturally set them apart from each other as well. Their battle is one of free-spoken barbarism versus deceptive legalism, and it's a showdown for the ages where only one can walk away with the happily ever after they both believe they deserve. When I said that a lot happens in the alternate timeline, I meant that there's a lot of stuff that's just there for the sake of fan service. Various recurring characters are shown under different circumstances, including an alternate version of Puss in Boots who has put on some weight after retirement. It's almost exactly like the treatment of Fat Thor in Avengers Endgame, complete with some cheap body-shaming gags, which were mean-spirited enough in the MCU, but in the context of a Shrek movie, actively undercuts the core message of the franchise. It's somewhat unfortunate, then, that Shrek's interaction with this reality's Puss in Boots results in the most meaningful exploration of the film's themes outside his dynamic with the villain. See, Puss in Boots might not be as athletic as he once was during his bounty hunting days, but the life he leads now is an unambiguously happy one. He's pampered and cared for by this timeline's Fiona, getting brushed twice a day and always having a fresh saucer of milk to drink. The fact that Puss accepts these good things for what they are shows that he has grown in a way that Shrek still has to.
Could it be true? Have the years of cream and pampery made me soft?
Don't be silly. Now who's a pretty kitty?
I am.
What's more, his indulgence and authentic happiness doesn't prevent Puss from being a selfless and heroic character when it counts. He does everything he can to help Shrek win over Fiona when he sees that they are meant to be together, and though his size does slow him down a bit, his swordsmanship never really left him. When you get right down to it, Fat Puss is the best Puss. Yeah, I said it, and I'm not wrong. Though Shrek's identity crisis does get a bit lost in the weeds of the Ogre Revolution, a largely literal external conflict, his eventual breakthrough reshapes how both he and we understand what it means to be an ogre. This is done on a micro level through him learning to trumpet with his ears, but it also happens when it comes to his relationship with Fiona. You see, much like in the original book, Fiona is his true love for a reason. Though she was born and raised human, her true form and authentic identity is that of an ogre. Shrek was trying to define what being an ogre was without acknowledging the experiences of other ogres, including his wife. And this led him to essentialize aspects of his past and present behavior as being a product of his ogre nature. He was looking in the mirror for an explanation when the truth was far more complicated. Shrek isn't the same ogre that he used to be, but he's still undeniably an ogre. He's still big and green, he still lives in a swamp, and he can still do the roar. The only thing that's really changed is some of his assumptions about what an ogre was. Being alone and mean is not an intrinsic part of the deal. It's just a stage of his life that he went through. The ogre resistance is proof that ogres can form communities and be good to each other, and the look of amazement on Shrek's face when he first walks into the camp says it all. In the end, his acceptance of the kindness of his fellow natural-born ogres and his true love Fiona let him escape from Rumpelstiltskin's dark timeline, returning to the party in the midst of the same explosive roar that Butterpants wished of him. There, Shrek finds more than his home as he left it. He finds himself truly in love with his life and everyone in it. He's finally exited that Hall of Mirrors, and on the other side was his happily ever after. I guess the lesson here is that we're defined by the people we choose to keep around us more than our skewed perceptions of ourselves, and that nostalgia for a romanticized past will always push us towards making stupid, life-ruining decisions. Truly, a moral for the ages. But what did you think? Leave a comment about what you think the lesson of Shrek Forever After was. Bonus points if you say it was the Shrek we made along the way. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and share it with your friends and family. And also consider subscribing to the Dire Gentleman channel, where we upload more than just reviews. We also talk about more movies on our Patreon, a link to which is in the description. This has been a Dire Gentleman channel video. And as always, I'll be seeing you in the near future.